Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Audit and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to just begin with some preliminary issues and protocol. It is a hybrid meeting, so we do have some participants joining us online, so we'll follow the usual rules around that. So could I ask for members to mute your microphone when you're not speaking, unmute it obviously when you wish to speak. Members in the chamber, please remember to use your microphone so members online can hear what you have to say. If you'd like to raise a question online, please use the raise your hand function and avoid using the chat function. A recording of this meeting will be made available, as usual, on the Council's YouTube channel following the meeting. Myself and officers attending will monitor proceedings to ensure all requests to speak are seen. To introduce the officers attending today's meeting, we are joined by Margaret McCrossan, Head of Accountancy, Michelle Blair, Chief Auditor, Alison Bolino, Senior Revenues Manager, Colin Wright, Committee Services Officer, Leona Allison, Assistant Committee Services Officer, and Grace Scanlon from External Audit, who is joining us online. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I have two notes of apologies, Clerk. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I've got apologies from Provost Montague and Councillor MacDonald.
That's great, Clerk. Thank you. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. So, as a reminder, the Councillors' Code of Conduct requires elected members to declare any financial or non-financial interest they have on items in today's agenda. Are there any such declarations to be made? That's no declarations. Okay. Moving on to item 3 on the agenda is my Chairman's report. Just like to say, as you may recall, last year we considered a number of fraud-related matters and we agreed to pursue publicity regarding the Council's whistleblowing arrangements, which is in line with one of the committee's own self-evaluation recommendations and also helps raise the profile of the work of this important committee. As you may have seen, with help from the communications team, a news article has been published on the Council's intranet page to highlight these, as well as both the anti-fraud, bribery and theft strategy, along with the anti-money laundering policy, which are both in place to protect the Council against malpractice through fraud and corrupt practice. As the article reflects, it's more important than ever that our employees remain vigilant to the Council's policies and ensure that these are followed at all times, which will help report any issues of non-compliance arising. Does anyone have any questions on my Chairman's report at all? Okay, so we can take that as agreed and move on to item number 4, which is a review of the consultancy expenditures and the associated log, which are in the papers before you. And I'd like to call on the Clerk to speak to this item. Thank you.
Thank you. So this report relates to the committee's interest in consultancy costs over a number of years. As some of you recall, at the end of 2018, the Council agreed to establish a log regarding the appointment of consultants and also reduce the threshold for allowing directors to appoint them from £50,000 to £10,000. During 2019, this committee agreed to review the log at the end of each financial year. A copy of the log for 22-23 is attached to the report for your consideration, and it's also published on the Council's website. As requested by the committee last year, this report now clarifies those of the costs that are itemised that will not ultimately be met by the Council. So it's recommended that you consider the feedback provided and discuss if there's anything else you want to take forward regarding that, and otherwise to note that a further report on such expenditure will be submitted to the committee at the end of the 23-24 financial year.
That's great, thank you very much. I would like to put it out to members now who'd like to ask questions. Before doing that, can I just note that I think that the addition of this new column makes it really useful and really clear to see what costs the Council are actually bearing as consultants and what's being paid by external sources. Councillor Ireland.
I would agree. That was really helpful. That really was, that change has been made as I was working my way through it. I've got 2 questions. On page 7 and 8, and please correct me if I've added this up wrong. There are contracts worth that are listed that are worth 61,700 on consultancy report for work on the delayed Eastwood Leisure Centre. This is something I'm constantly bringing up. I do understand that, but I'm quite worried about additional costs around this, especially with the increased construction costs. So my first question is, looking at these costs that we have in front of us, will any of these have to be repeated when that does move forward? I think I've got a wee bit of concern over that. It would be great to hear that they don't have to be. That would be wonderful. Am I fine to ask my second question?
Yeah,
It's very quick.
Yeah.
On page 13, there's a few listings which refer to work that's been undertaken on whether to retain HQ or Spearsbridge office. So I was quite interested when I saw that. I was just wondering, when will that report be available to either Cabinet or elected members?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. Well, I certainly noted the point in the first one as well, and I think it'd be quite good to have totals added to the report. You know, to say this is the total expenditure overall, this is the net expenditure after we factor in external bodies. Is there someone on the committee today who can answer Councillor Ireland's points?
Margaret might be able to answer some of the questions, but if not, I can take those back and circulate the clarification to you following the meeting.
I think that would be really helpful, because the fifth column here states the contract awarded sum, and that would be the maximum sum we'd expect to incur. So if there is going to be a recurrence of a cost, that would potentially increase, which I think is the point, and it's a valid point. Does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to make on this item at all? No? Okay. So, please, Margaret. Yeah.
On the Eastwood Leisure Centre query, there are a number of different lines listed on the report here. I would need to get a bit more information on exactly what work was involved in those before I could get an assurance as to whether or not they're likely to be repeated. I know that they're listed as Hub West Scotland being the lead in that, and they are obviously still involved with the project, so at least the knowledge there is going to be consistent. But nevertheless, if there was to be a redesign, I'm not sure whether there would be a cause to revisit. But then with price fluctuations and inflation, that could happen in any project, even if you're not intending to redesign. So I'll take that away, and I'll ask our property people if they can give us a wee bit more information on that one. On the second point, which is Eastwood and Spears Bridge, I understand that officers are actually working on a report at the moment on that, so I think it's going to be pretty soon when that comes back. Again, I can come back and report separately, but I'm aware that they're actively drafting a report at the moment.
I think that'd be really helpful, actually, because from what I recall, it was towards the end of last year that Cabinet decided to look at this, and I kind of was under the impression that we would have something by now. So, Councillor Wallace.
Is seat 4 still on here?
Yeah, can you switch on the microphone?
Yeah, just looking at the threshold had been reduced from 50,000 down to 10,000. Whilst this doesn't come into the category, if we even look at just the first two on the list that's here in the matrix, the consultation with pupils, number 1, consultation with pupils, number 2, supplier name Karen Shepherd, and for both of these, one is for 1,400, the other one's for 2,300. If you join them together, then we're actually up about 4,000. It appears to me as if it's exactly the same job that's been done here. I'm just conscious, I appreciate this doesn't come into this category, but there are other situations in which particular projects have been broken down unnecessarily, perhaps to keep it under the 10,000 threshold. And that's the first question. The second question is, do we have any in which it's been under the 10,000 threshold, but actually at the end of the consultancy we actually ended up being over 10,000? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. That's a very apt observation. Margaret, would you be in a position to respond to that just now?
I can't answer the... I'm getting this all wrong today. I can't answer the second part as to whether any projects have been deliberately broken down to be kept under the limit, but we can certainly refer that back to departments and ask. In terms of the one about the schools, it looks as if it is, as you say, two separate ones, although the dates are the same. I think the dates are there because they coincide with the start of the school term, so I don't think anything should be read into the fact that they both went out on the same date. One is for preschool and one is for Gaelic education, so they would be entirely separate exercises. But as you say, that probably wasn't an example of what you're thinking the problem might be.
It was actually a perfect example. I thought, it's just, I think you can see what I'm getting at. It's just one to keep in mind whenever the paper's coming forward again. Thanks.
Okay. Anything further to note from members? Okay, we're happy to accept the report. Okay, agreed. Thank you. So item 5 on the agenda is the review of the National External Audit Report on resourcing the benefit service. I appreciate it's Councillor MacDonald who was leading on this, but he can't be with us today. Clark, you'd like to speak to that?
Just very quickly to introduce it. So this provides feedback on the External Audit Report on resourcing the benefit services. And as the Chair has said, Councillor MacDonald, who can't be with us today, is leading in this report. Feedback has been provided by the Director of Business Operations and Partnerships, and Alison Ballingall, Senior Revenue Manager, who is also involved in preparing the report, is with us today. If there are any issues about the feedback that you want to raise with her.
Any elected members with questions? Councillor Island's indicated.
Thank you very much, Chair. I did have a couple of questions. It was just more for a wee bit of clarity in a couple of the paragraphs. On page 9, I did note that the processing times have been impacted, and it's listed as ERC ranking 32nd in Scotland for new Housing Benefit Council tax reduction claims. I wanted to know, first of all, is that still where we're sitting? Is that the most up-to-date figure, or have we moved on from that at all? And I also noted on page 18, paragraph 14, I had a question on that as well, Chair, if that's okay to ask. So paragraph 14, it talks about cost reductions, and many vacant posts are not being filled, and a restructure is planned during 23-24 year to manage further cost-saving targets. And I suppose my question around that was, is there any information available on how many jobs, I suppose, that equates to? That there wasn't any information in the report. And the second part of paragraph 14 was, from 2022 onwards, increased resiliency has been managed through an external contract. My question is, what is the cost of that contract, given that we were just looking at consultancy fees just before? So, and what does that cover? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Alison, over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so first question on the housing benefit performance. It's changed quite dramatically since that point. At the moment, we've just finished the financial year for up to 31st of March, and we're at 20.8 days is the processing time. The average for the UK, unfortunately I don't have just the average for Scotland, but the average for the UK is 20 days. So we are just around average, and that's for housing benefit new claims. For housing benefit change of circumstance, we are ending the year at 4.2 days, and the average for the UK is 8 days. So we're quite far ahead of the UK average there. So significantly changed. sorry, will I go on to the other questions?
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of cost reductions and vacant posts and the restructure that's planned, I don't know at this stage exactly the number of jobs that will be impacted, but that's something that we'll work through with our HR colleagues during this year. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be more information on that at some point. And in terms of the resiliency contract, that contract is for a period of up to 2 years. It was signed off as part of the use of the welfare contingency funding. That was signed off by a cabinet, I believe, and the maximum spend on that is £49,999.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Councillor Bolus.
Appreciate the figures here are historic, but just curious to know as to why we would be the worst council in Scotland in terms of the processing times. What was it that particularly impacted on us that didn't appear to impact on other councils? Thanks.
So I suppose the thing that impacted us that didn't impact other councils was that we changed our system. We changed the system that we were using to process all of the claims. So everybody was impacted by the pandemic and everyone's been impacted by the cost of living crisis, but we're the only one who changed systems in that period. So that was really the big impact that we had that other councils didn't have at that period of time.
If I just come back, I presume the new system is working tickety-boo now and we've got over the problems? Yep.
Yes, those were sort of some teething issues at the beginning. It's quite a complex area benefits, and when you get into a situation where you make a change, and you get into maybe a little bit of a backlog situation, it takes quite a lot of effort to get back out of that. So we've managed to resolve that, and I think just even with the numbers that I've quoted there, we're now either at average or above average performance for the UK.
Okay, I'd like to supplement that question with reference to paragraph 11. So to actually put percentages on it, our in-year recovery in 2022 was 73.8%, which is around 20% lower than the prior year. So I really just wanted to ask, to what extent was that because of the macroeconomic situation, and to what extent was that due to the software and internal systems change? And has it recovered post-year end?
So in terms of the housing benefit overpayment situation, that's impacted certainly by the external factors in terms of what's happening within the wider economy. As we've got towards year end, we're now at 78.9%, so that has improved. And in terms of the overall recovery, it's gone up to 9.7%. So both are improved on the end of December numbers.
Okay. Really just hoping to ascertain that the upheaval with the change in systems is going to bear fruit in the longer term, and that we'll see an enhancement on where we were at previously before the change.
Yeah, I think in terms of the overpayment situation, our understanding is that's more impacted by the economic situation within the country and within the situation that individuals are facing in terms of being able to pay debt. Maybe as opposed to changing system, that's been our expectation. I think in terms of the processing on the housing benefit, that was a slightly different scenario because we did get into a backlog situation, but on the debt situation, our understanding is more external factors that are impacting that.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Any other members wishing to speak in this? No, okay. I can ask for agreement to the report then. Agreed. Okay. Item number 6 on the agenda is an update on the implementation of the internal audit plan for 22-23. And can I call on Michelle Blair, Chief Auditor, to speak to this, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the final progress report for 22-23. There were 7 audit reports relating to planned 22-23 audit work that have been issued since the last progress report. 2 of these were for the Trust, so you won't get full details of those. There's also 7 audits relating to 22-23 that are still to be completed, but they're progressing well and they should be issued soon. And after that, we'll start on 23-24 audit plan work.
As noted on the covering report, there was one new item covered by contingency, and this was a theft of cash and an iPad in one of the council locations, totalling approximately £600, and the police were notified of this and involved. In terms of reports where we've received departmental responses since the last progress report, these are summarised in Appendix 3, page 27. The first one I would draw your attention to is ordering and certification, and there's a few areas within this where areas were identified for improvement, and that is use of approved suppliers should be used where available. Monitoring of spend to ensure appropriate procurement route is followed to comply with contract standing orders. We need to be better at placing purchase orders before we receive the invoice, and as an example, in the period September to December 22, there was 909 instances of purchase orders being placed after the invoice. And there was also inappropriate use of miscellaneous ledger codes, which means that if you do ledger analysis after that point, it becomes less meaningful because everything's in, or more things are in miscellaneous than should be. In the last progress report, I commented on 2 significant pieces of work that had been carried out using contingency time. One of these was in relation to a contract where there was significant overspend. Further details of this is now included under item 5 in Appendix 3. And you should note that the first recommendation that we made was that a report should be submitted to Cabinet, and that's now been implemented as a paper was submitted to Cabinet this morning. The other issue mentioned previously was in relation to an anomaly that originated when we were doing payroll work for the Trust. And it was established through testing that the new system for payroll had incorrectly calculated both employee and employer national insurance calculations. And again, you've got some of the summary recommendations from that report, even though it's for the Trust, but you've got the summary recommendations that relate to actions that are required by council employees. I would also make mention of the fact that I do still have some concerns over the payroll system, which I've not yet had answers to, so it might well appear in the annual report if it's not resolved before then. Finally, Appendix 4 shows progress against our indicators, and we're currently not meeting 2 of them, where we're slightly over, and this is usually caused by delays getting information from departments. So subject to any questions, I would ask you to note the progress report and also indicate if you would like any of the reports to be circulated.
That's great, thank you, Michelle. Councillor Wallace is first up.
Thank you, Chair. You may not be aware of this, Chair, and Councillor Edel may not as new councillors, but Councillors Ireland and Buchanan will know. In fact, they were part of the administration at the time. I'm thinking a few years ago, well, it was during the pandemic, we had an outside contractor who was, I think they were building the new nurseries, and then COVID hit us, and we had a huge amount of plant that was left on council land, and we were charged to the tune of £800,000 to hold that on our land on their behalf, but we were charged for it. I did raise my concerns with the then chair of the Audit Committee, but for one reason or another it didn't appear to be followed through. So I've had great concerns about what's been happening in procurement since then, and I think what we've got in front of us here kind of underlines that. This just seems to be an extraordinarily lackadaisical approach to how our people are handling these very scarce resources that we have. This particular one here, I've mentioned one previously, this particular one here with the insulation and roofing contract, I'm just curious as to whether we need to not necessarily look further into what's happened here. I think we know what's happened here. It's been a very strong report, very detailed. I'm just wondering as to whether we should be looking at other contracts, that as to whether these have been impacted by maybe the same personnel or the same approach or the same apparently lackadaisical approach to procurement, as to whether it maybe indicates some other goings on that perhaps we don't know about. That's my first question, and my second question is in terms of payroll. Internal auditor mentioned about continuing concerns about payroll and questions which have not necessarily been answered. I'd be curious to know what they are. So that's two things. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Michelle, you able to take those, please?
Okay, firstly on the contract, we've obviously got time set aside in the annual plan to do some contract work. We haven't decided what we're going to look at yet, but it's obviously limited to looking at usually a sample. In the case of the EWI, we looked only at that contract, and it was very time consuming because it was so detailed. And also I would ask if you do want the full report for EWI, if you let me know and I can circulate it. In terms of payroll, again, I've put time aside, knowing that I had an issue with payroll, I've put time aside in the plan for 23-24 to do some further work on payroll. And it's mainly, my concerns are that the way the new system is calculating sum of pay, I don't think it's material, but I think it's just not quite correct. So we will look at that over the next few months as part of the payroll report.
I really wanted to supplement that by, in terms of payroll, I think it should be completely correct, rather than materially, because it's people's pay, which I think is a point you fully understand. I really wanted to follow on from the question there before putting it back out for members again. In terms of this report on external wall insulation, that contract, the third bullet point there, unrealistic quantities were used in the tender document. As the Chief Auditor, I really wanted your take on whether this could have compromised the tendering process. Because if we have gone out to tender and one of the estimates used is wildly incorrect, then perhaps actually we haven't selected the best value contract as a council, and one of the other alternatives may have proven to be a better value if it was quoted for correctly. Do you have any view on that?
That's quite a difficult one to answer. Obviously the quantities are key because it's part of the evaluation process. So if you've got 3 or 4 different suppliers bidding for a contract and one's particularly cheap at one aspect of the job and the quantities are low, it could impact on it. In this instance, I don't actually know. I don't think it would have impacted significantly, but I can't actually say.
Okay. You want to please come in on that?
You'll be aware that a report went up on this very matter to Cabinet this morning, and the members there actually asked exactly the same question. How could they be assured of best value? And they were advised that the officers had gone out through our procurement team and checked with other council contracts elsewhere out with ERC of a similar nature to check whether it looked as if the rates that we were paying were best value and in line with what they would expect from their own experience, and that had come back and justified that we were still demonstrating best value in comparison to elsewhere.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, as a new elected member, I understand there's an organisation called Scotland Excel, which is to aid councils, local authorities tendering in situations like this. Did we adhere to their framework, if you like, in the relevant manner?
Scotland Excel was not used, and one of the recommendations in my report was that they should consider Scotland Excel in the future. The other thing I would comment on is regarding whether it was the most advantageous contractor that we selected. I think procurement went out to different councils to ask if cost per property was reasonable and similar to what they were paying, and they were told yes. That doesn't necessarily mean that the same contractor would have won had the quantities been more accurate. But we didn't necessarily overpay per property, but it wouldn't necessarily have been the same supplier that would have won. I don't know.
No, I understand. I appreciate being kind of dominating time. I'll go to Councillor Ireland there and bring in Councillor Wallace.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was quite worried when I read through this paper. I really was. It was that there was a paper that came up as part of the the meeting when we set the budget, and I had picked up, there was a line that was in a housing paper that came before us, and it said, in conjunction with colleagues in procurement and property and technical services, a robust approach is taken in relation to the procurement and management of external contractors. And yet, when I was reading, and I asked for more information on the day, what that approach is, and is that same approach applied to every single contract to ensure fairness across everything that we actually, what contracts we take on board or we give out. So, I mean, there was quite serious. One of them was that you highlighted that there was some of the key points. One of them was key items omitted from the tender document resulting in variations. And I knew that the paper was going to Cabinet today, but I didn't watch Cabinet, and I don't know what was discussed at the time. I'm a wee bit unclear on how this overspend came about at the level that it did, and why wasn't it taken to Cabinet. So I had a couple of questions around that. So is there any information available on what key items were omitted from the tender document that resulted in variations? And also, I want to know what steps are being taken to remedy this. You spoke about Scotland Excel being put forward as a suggestion. I think that's a good one. So I want to know what's being done to remedy it. And also, my question's similar to Councillor Wallace's, in that is there any additional work ongoing that's actually looking at procurement across the housing department? Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, would you like to come in at this point? Then I'll bring Councillor Wallace.
It might be helpful if I circulate the full report and the full response so that you can see the detail. I can't really comment on other contracts as such, and I don't know in terms of what you were told about housing way back, because I only really looked at this contract, but certainly we will be looking at more contracts in the future.
Thank you. Chair, I think Councillor Ireland has raised some very valid points there. When she mentions about some words on a piece of paper there about how we take a robust approach. These seem to be just words on a piece of paper, and we're supposed to take them for granted. And quite clearly, the word robust does not pay any a fair description of what has been going on. I'm not suggesting things will not be changing. I personally feel, Chair, that we really need to look much closer into this particular item here, rather than just letting it say that, yes, everything will be fine and let it go. So I'd be very keen to see the report the Internal Auditor is referring to. And I think it's on that basis, once we've all had a chance to read that, maybe come back and see if we have to take any further investigations into whether we ask the Internal Auditor to devote some additional time to this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. And I think, as Chair, I think it would be an idea that that report circulated to all members of the committee, including those who are not with us today, so that everyone has fair opportunity to review that. And presumably, in line with Councillor Wallace's suggestion, that this is one of the reasons why there's contingency time available, I suppose, is to look at arising matters like this. Would that be appropriate?
I'll send the report to the clerk and she can circulate it. Certainly we do have contingency time, but also I've got time set aside specifically for contracts, so we could potentially use that instead of contingency, or in addition to.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Margaret, yeah.
I can just add to that at Cabinet this morning, again, I'm just looking back to my notes from that, same questions were asked about, what has changed, could this happen again? And Phil Dawes at the time had said that they are improving procedures in a number of areas. They're now just finalising the updated procedures, but he did make reference to a few factors which had contributed, these being vacancies and reduced numbers of staffing in place, and they're now moving to recruit, but he has tried to recruit, for example, areas like quantity surveyors. We've been out a couple of times unsuccessfully. He's going out to recruit again, but he sees that as one of the measures that would have helped. The other thing that he specifically mentioned was that after the COVID impact on construction projects, the department would normally be dealing with, for example, maybe 24 projects. So instead of 24 projects, they were dealing with the normal volume plus a backlog of about 8 projects from COVID. So he was saying that there was a reduced cohort of staff dealing with a larger than normal volume of projects. Nevertheless, the procedures themselves still need tightened up to make sure that before particular instructions are given to contractors, that they have kept their eye on the financial consequences of those.
Before bringing Councillor Wallace, I'd just like to ask very quickly, in terms of Test 1 ordering certification, it was noted earlier, Michelle, that there's a large number of items which are not being logged correctly in terms of, we don't have a requisite purchase order beforehand. In your opinion, do you think that has led to this oversight with the failure to get Cabinet approval? Because it wasn't clear from the records that that threshold had been breached.
I don't think it is linked, but it's not a direct consequence. I think they're kind of separate. There just was a general lack of financial monitoring overall in the external wall insulation contract, and there's a huge number of issues in it, which is probably greater than what's in ordering and certification.
Councillor Wallace, then Councillor Redland.
The first paper here was about consultancy fees, and I don't think there's any question that as we are having severe cutbacks in what councillors or what councils are doing, then we are becoming more and more reliant on outside advisors. Quite clearly, what we've got here is a situation which suggests at the moment we'll need to read the report and find out more about it. However, it's quite clearly indicating, well, what's coming back from this morning's Cabinet would appear to be that we were severely understaffed, and yet we did have the opportunity that we could have gone to Scotland Excel, but there was nothing in the system which said, stop, we cannot make a decision, we do not have the time to make a decision, and as a result of that, it's cost us hundreds of thousands of pounds. So again, not only coming here, it could well be that we need to find out what happens when we get to that situation which people do not have time, because it's going to be becoming more and more prevalent in this organisation, like all other councils. It's where we are losing that expertise because we are doing voluntary redundancies, etc. And it's becoming more and more difficult. So again, I don't want to preempt what's in this report, but I think there's a number of strands that are going to come from this. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you. Councillor, my apologies. I know you've been waiting for some time to speak.
I find what Councillor Ireland and Councillor Wallace have raised quite concerning. We're going to be sent a copy of this report, and we've also heard this matter of, I think it was 70 or 80 purchase orders that did not get prior approval, but they've got it retrospectively, which is a huge number. I just wonder if we could have a special meeting of this committee to consider the report we're going to be sent and the issues raised today, because I think they're very serious.
It's a valid concern you've raised, Councillor Edlund. I think the best way to proceed is the report will be circulated from the Chief Auditor, which will give all members, including the members who are not with us today, but obviously they can view back these proceedings when it's available online, and then we can decide on the way forward at the next meeting. Clerk?
Yeah, I can't remember what's on the agenda for the next meeting, and that'll be at the end of June. But I mean, there's no reason why an item couldn't be put on that if you wanted to, at the end of the day, put that report on the agenda and take it from there. So I mean, I think there's a process to go through. I think we circulate the report and see what the feedback. It could be that it answers a number of questions. So I think it might be better to sort of do it on an incremental basis and take it from there.
It also gives us the opportunity to view what Cabinet's comments on this were today as well, which I don't think any of us have had the opportunity yet. Councillor Buchanan wishes to speak at this opportunity. He's not had the chance to yet, so.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, no, I welcome the issues that have been raised. I think it's right that we wait and see the full report and then decide if there's what further action may or may not be necessary. And again, I think we also have to take into account any decisions at the Cabinet this morning, which again haven't seen what scrutiny was deployed there. So I think we need to get that information and then decide how best to take it forward for this committee.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Any other members have any further comment to make? Well, I think we've had a pretty fulsome conversation on that, but we need to look at it in more detail. I mean, ultimately, my view on it is £400,000 is a lot of money. You look at it in the context of the two budget proposals this chamber looked at earlier in the year, one with a council tax increase of 6%, one of 5.5%. Well, without this overspend, it could have been 5.25%, you know, or thereabouts, with all other things being equal. So this has a material impact on the finances. Margaret, do you have anything?
Yeah, just pointing out that was actually, it was through as capital, it wasn't revenue, so it wouldn't have been council tax funded because it was on the housing account and because it was capital. But nevertheless, again, something that we pointed out this morning, back in December, the Cabinet had actually approved the transfer of capital funding from the HRA energy efficiency line to this contract line, so that the expenditure was covered without having to increase spend anywhere in total across the council or across the HRA capital. So it was contained within the total envelope of funding for the year. And the reason it was taken from the energy efficiency is because obviously the wall insulation contributes to the energy efficiency of the houses.
I appreciate that clarification. Obviously the revenue and the capital budgets are different. I was using that merely as an illustrative example of the magnitude of the £400,000 in terms of the council's budget. Okay, so I'm happy to proceed on the basis we've set out that we'll get a copy of the report and we'll discuss this at the next meeting of the committee after we've had the chance to review it. And I'll be happy to accept the report overall. Okay, agreed. Moving on to the final item on the agenda, which is item number 7, which is a review of this committee's work plans for 22-23 and 23-24. I'd like to call on the clerk to speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you again. So following approval by the committee in June last year of the 22-23 work plan, to the extent it had been developed by that stage, and also the update that was provided to the committee in January, this report asked the committee to note and consider performance against the 22-23 work plan, approve the draft 22-24 annual work plan to the extent it's been developed thus far, agree that the development of that plan continue with an update submitted to a future meeting, and note that progress made delivering the plan will be reviewed in due course with a progress report submitted in that. Amongst other things, as the report reflects, such plans help the committee schedule and prioritise its work over the course of each year. Whenever they are considered, it's highlighted that they're effectively live documents and that their development will continue. Regarding the external audit reports mentioned, based on what I know at the moment regarding the publication of these, a reasonable judgment has been made on when it might be possible to submit reports to the committee on these. So if there are any issues you wish to raise regarding any aspect of the report, I'll be happy to address those if I can, and otherwise I would ask you to approve the recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to raise to this item at all? I'll be happy to accept the... Okay, so with that being accepted, that concludes today's business. Thank you for your attendance.